First of all, your thoughts on this definition of extremism. Does it help us?
Well, firstly, I don't think you fight extremism with a sort of state-sponsored cancel culture. It's just never going to work. The way that you fight extremism is that you put your own house in order. And obviously I'm going to mention the alleged comments of Mr Hester about my friend and colleague Diane Abbott, which would meet anybody's definition of extremism, because we were talking about misogynistic race hatred and even references to threatening references and so on. But putting that aside, you do not fight extremism with censorship or cancel culture or non-engagement. You fight extremism by sorting out your own family and friends and party, and then by engagement, by showing another way, by demonstrating how we can get back to disagreeing well in politics and in debate in the country, not by this kind of nonsense. I personally think that the launch of this new definition, and crucially the list of banned people and groups that will follow, is dead cat culture war politics. It's a desperate measure by Mr Gove just before a general election.
Well, let's not shove Frank Hester's alleged comments to one side. I mean, Michael Gove says that he's apologised, that he's shown remorse. He said that they're racist comments. But this new definition would say that they would have to be part of an ideology. I mean, do you think Frank Hester's comments would be full foul of extremism?
Well, on this is a very broad and flabby definition of extremism, and the quoted remarks, the alleged remarks that I have read of Mr Hester in quote marks, demonstrate an ideological position where he, as a white man, seems to be superior to black women. Now that is a racist and misogynistic ideology. There's no question about that.
What did you think of those comments when you heard them?
I felt sick. I felt anxious. You know, it's so visceral, and there was a menace. You know, when you start saying that people should be shot, we've lost 2 MPs to violence in not so many years, one Conservative and one Labour. You know, for a senior person who runs an organisation and who's given £10 million to the party of government to even, whisper that someone deserves to be shot, let alone on the basis of their sex or race, is just terrifying. And it's just not where we should be in the first quarter of the 21st century in the so-called liberal democracy that Mr Gove's definition is designed to protect. So I mean, it makes the government look totally hypocritical in relation to this definition. I also think that this definition is so flabby that when combined with the ability of ministers to put people on prescribed lists, it's very dangerous.
But isn't your fear, your revulsion at a allegedly racist comments exactly why the government needs a definition of extremism and a framework to act against it, whether that is racism, far-right activism or Islamism?
So the framework is there. We have laws, and there are laws under which even Mr Hester's comments can be investigated, and so be it. But everything isn't about law. Some things are about culture. And culture, a tolerant culture as opposed to an extremist or intolerant culture, is not built by disengagement and prescribed lists. It's built by demonstrating your ability as a senior person in public life to disagree well with people in the other party, in the other faction of the party, taking different views about the issues of the day. That's how you fight extremism, by example, not with more extremism, which is what censorship and disengagement by government looks like.
I mean, you say that. There will be those watching this who will say that's naive, that we've seen Islamists, we've seen far-right terrorist groups who simply disengage from political society for their own ends, and that we as a society need to crack down on them much harder.
It doesn't matter who it is, whether they're far right or whether they're religious extremists of any variety, who often share a lot of views about women and gay people and so on. I think that there are properly laws about inciting violence, And there are all sorts of other criminal laws that exist to protect people from threat and from violence, and rightly so. We even have some of the broadest terror legislation around for prescribing terrorist groups. But we should be concentrating on actions rather than mere thoughts, let alone this being permissive. One of the most dangerous things about Mr Gove's definition is that you can be caught within it if you are accused of creating a permissive environment for the so-called extremists. Now that could affect journalists. That could affect debating fora of whatever kind, and I just don't think that's the way to tackle extremism. The thing about the 21st century and the internet is that everybody has a platform. So no platforming, as it used to be called, doesn't really work. What you have to do is you have to take on the challenge. You have to demonstrate your value. Another irony about this definition is that it talks about those who negate other people's fundamental rights and freedoms. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the government itself meets its own definition of extremism. It's currently taking through Parliament the so-called Safety of Rwanda bill that disapplies our Supreme Court, that ousts the jurisdiction of our courts and takes rights away from asylum seekers and refugees.
Well, I'm sure the government is not here that they would disagree with that, but I want to take you back to something that you were just talking about there, which is that this process names people, and it will name organisations who are seen as being out with these rules, who haven't necessarily committed any crimes, who haven't faced a court. It's very hard to think of a precedent for that, for someone who's been stigmatised by the government without being with your legal brain. Well, is that sustainable?
It's not sustainable, and it will open the government to all sorts of legal challenges, including human rights challenges, on the basis of the stigma that they have put on people and the consequences that it could have for people, for their employment, for their ability to travel to other countries, etc., etc. It is a big libel on a person to be accused by a Secretary of State of being an extremist, and mistakes will happen. It'll be the wrong Chakrabarti, and a well-esteemed newsreader will get blamed for the dangerous views of Shami Chakrabarti, for example. These things happen all the time in government departments. Mistakes happen. It is terrifying, really, to be giving a politician the awesome power to brand people extremists without proper criminal legal due process.
And one thought is there isn't much that unites you with somebody like Miriam Cates, but on this one you are both talking about the need to preserve free speech and to rein in some of these controls.
Well, that's right, isn't it?
But did you ever think you'd be in the same boat as
I've been in boats with all sorts of people over many years, but you are right that free speech is precious, should be precious to everybody, regardless of their other views, because without free speech, it's very, very hard for democracy to sustain. So, for example, Ms. Cates probably disagrees with me about the Human Rights Act, the Convention on Human Rights, about the Refugee Convention, and all sorts of other things that I hold dear. But I think she should be able to debate these things, and she should not fall within this kind of definition. And of course she probably wouldn't, because her ministers in her government would not prescribe her. They would be prescribing people in other parties or outside the political process altogether. But that doesn't make it better. It's a flabby definition. It puts too much power in the hands of the Secretary of State, and I think it will cause more division in our country, which is not really what we should be looking for right now. It's dead cat, culture war politics, and in the week of Mr Hester, faintly ridiculous.